Gaining value in Commander is just drawing more cards and getting more mana, right? Well, yes, but there's more to it than that. I, like many casual Commander players, enjoy the playstyle of a grindy, value-focused game of attrition. Because of the longer turn length and multiplayer elements of Commander, this steers a lot of my decks into a kind of mid-range category that has impact in all parts of the game. Kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of idea. Creating value turn after turn is what gives these jack of all trades decks their staying power. Building with value in mind allows your deck to survive into the mid and late game. But what can you do to create value outside of drawing cards and making more mana? Decks that excel in this kind of playstyle have ways to get advantage out of the same piece of cardboard over and over again. This video is going to cover things that you probably already know but may have dismissed in your own deck building, and I want to shine some light on them today. We're going to be talking about engines, repeatable abilities, and value that scales with the multiplayer aspect of Commander. In a 1v1 format, you've got one opponent, one board to read, and one set of resources to outpace. If you draw more cards than them or trade more efficiently than them, then you're in the driver's seat. Commander throws that math out of the window. You've got 3 opponents instead of 1. That means 3 times the threat assessment, 3 times the removal, and 3 times the players who might team up against you or ignore you completely, depending on what's more convenient for them in the moment. Value isn't a straight line anymore is what I'm saying. So if the old school math doesn't work, what actually counts as value in Commander? While it is cards in your hand, it's also anything that improves your position relative to the table as a whole. That could be a permanent generating resources every turn, a deterrent that changes what your opponents are willing to do, or even just where you sit in the ever-changing threat hierarchy. Once you start seeing value this way, you start noticing it in places you weren't looking before. And that's what today's video is about. 3 places this value is hiding in plain sight, starting with the synergy pieces sitting right in front of you on your battlefield. But before we get into all of that, my day job is as a personal trainer and a fitness coach. If you've been putting off going to the gym or building a workout routine, in the description I have a free beginner strength and fat loss guide if you've been looking for some help getting started. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the elements of deck building that allow for this grindy game of attrition, and the first elements are the engines. Engines in Commander are the bread and butter of most Commander decks. But just so we're on the same page, what is an engine? An engine is a singular card or group of cards that provide value beyond the turn that they were played. Value engines allow players to take advantage of the longer gameplay nature of the Commander format. Playing a Sign in Blood will immediately give you 2 cards once it's cast, but an early game Phyrexian Arena or Black Market Connections has the potential to draw you upwards of 7 to 8 cards over the course of a game. Where an engine might be inefficient at first, the long-term value over the course of the game makes up for its initial cost. When I think of an engine, the first archetype that comes to mind is Blink. While it's not the king of closing out games, Blink does an amazing job at accumulating long-term value over the course of the game. There are some elements that we can take away from this archetype that can fit into any style of deck to accumulate more value. This can be referred to as a package, or a collection of cards that work together in a deck, but aren't necessarily the main theme of the deck. Let's take Stoneforge Mystic and Sword of Hearth and Home for example. The Stoneforge Mystic can tutor for the Sword of Hearth and Home. On your next turn, you can equip the sword to the Mystic, swing at the player that you now have evasion from with the sword, and now you're getting your Blink engine going. You can either use this to blink the Stoneforge Mystic to find more high-impact equipment, or use it to blink a creature already on the battlefield with a strong enters the battlefield trigger. You could also swap out Stoneforge Mystic for a Trophy Mage to search for a collection of 3 mana artifacts that you've put into your deck. Another example of this Blink package is Recruiter of the Guard grabbing Felia, or Imperial Recruiter grabbing Jaxus. In Jeskai, both Recruiter of the Guard and Imperial Recruiter can grab Soul Herder. Transit Mage can be used to tutor for a Conjurer's Closet, which can then be blinked by the closet to get a Panharmonicon. And Moonblessed Cleric can find Teleportation, Circle, or Airbender's Ascension to continue your Blink engine to gain you access to a suite of enchantments that help you with your game plan. Ephemerate and Archaeomancer, or Eternal Witness, can also make for a powerful Blink engine that utilizes your graveyard. This graveyard can also be a great source of repeatable value. Academy Ruins and Hall of Heliod's Generosity are recursion engines in your mana base that repeatedly grab back important artifacts or enchantments. And have you truly lived if you haven't cast a Sun Titan, returning Lightning Greaves to the field, equipping to Sun Titan, swinging and getting another card back from the graveyard? That's pure value right there. What if the card that you got back with Sun Titan was a Seal of Cleansing? Well, now you've created a removal engine. While not as efficient as a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile, a removal engine allows you to pick off problem threats on the board without expending a card in your hand. You can repeatedly pick off your opponent's value creatures using Broadside Bombardiers, remove more problem threats with Avatar of Woe or Royal Assassin, or even shut off your opponent's commanders using Oko Thief of Crowns. If you're an equipment deck, Argentum Armor will quickly ruin your opponent's day, but for any deck, I recommend the equipment Bloodthirsty Blade. Bloodthirsty Blade can goad utility creatures into unfavorable combats and force your opponent's giant beaters to swing into one of your other opponents for big damage. Engines do a lot for creating staying power in a deck. The value that it creates allows you to always have options going into the mid and the late game. Reiterating this here, you don't need to build a full-on Reanimator or Blink deck, but rather small packages that interweave synergy into existing decks. Finding ways to interweave value engines with recursion engines is how you snowball your way to victory in a commander game. Now, value engines are all well and good, but there's another way that we can capitalize on value that doesn't take away resources from your hand. Activated abilities, whether it be on creatures or permanents, give you ways to impact the game without expending cards in your hand. These abilities can span from drawing cards, creating board presence, or removing threats on the table. These abilities can be especially potent if you're playing a deck that wants to hold up mana on your opponent's turns. Let's take the Scarab God, for example. Building him as a zombie typal style of deck is a perfectly acceptable way to build him. In fact, that's the most popular way to build him according to EDHREC. But I don't fear the Scarab God that's a zombie typal deck. I fear the Scarab God that's a full-blown control deck. The Scarab God has an activated ability that helps you create a board state. What's extremely potent about this ability is it doesn't have the words activate only as a sorcery. This means you can play the Scarab God as a draw-go control deck where you can hold up interaction and removal. In the event that removal isn't needed, you can sink the mana that you would have spent on that removal into a 4/4 zombie Steve or a 4/4 zombie Eternal Witness. This is a powerful synergy in its own right. But what if we go outside of the normal control colors? Agatha of the Vile Cauldron is a deck built primarily around activated abilities. It's on my personal list of commanders to build that have a controlling nature outside of your traditional control colors. Imagine being able to hold up mana for removal, but also being able to save the mana to burn down your opponents when the removal isn't needed. With having activated abilities that you can spend your mana on, that means cards that untap your mana on your opponent's turns plays double duty. Both of these commanders are a menace in their own right, but when paired with a Sphinx of the Second Sun or Wilderness Reclamation, or Sword of Feast and Famine or Bear Umbra, they get put in overdrive. Both of these decks would also love to get their hands on a Seedborn Muse, which, in my opinion, is probably one of the most egregious game changers on the game changer list. Definitely deserves its spot. There is a hidden advantage to activated abilities. Your opponents know that they're there. At first, it doesn't sound like an advantage, right? Having information revealed typically is an advantage for your opponent and a disadvantage for you. But when you have the activated ability on the field and the prerequisites to activate the ability at instant speed, this creates a scenario called Threat of Activation. Threat of Activation is the phenomenon where a creature or permanent with a relevant activated ability changes your opponent's behavior just by having the ability available to you, even if you never actually use it. Imagine a police car parked on a highway shoulder. The police officer doesn't need to pull anyone over because just by being parked there, everyone slows down just because it could pull them over. The deterrent happens whether or not the officer actually pursues anyone. Let's take the card Soul Snare. On the surface, looks like a slower, restricted, and more expensive Swords to Plowshare. And really, you'd be right. But instead of looking at this card as removal, what if we looked at it as a Ghostly Prison? An enchantment that makes an opponent think twice about attacking us out of fear of being behind on resources. Opponents know that we have options available to us, and with that knowledge, they become more hesitant to mess with our plans. Being able to back up these threats with instant speed interaction from your hand makes them all the more powerful. So, activated abilities, when able to be taken advantage of, give you many more opportunities to play around with what your opponents are doing, creating a kind of invisible value. There's also a silent conversation going on between you and your opponent. Open mana plus an onboard activated ability means that you might not be the best target to go after at this moment. But instead of this conversation going on inside their head, what if you interjected on what they were already thinking? It would be a good idea to send your creatures over there, right? Confirming what they were already thinking. Those are multiplayer politics. And another way that you can get value on demand whenever you want it just by opening your mouth. Gaining value from multiplayer politics can take many forms. It could be as simple as cutting a deal with an opponent to organizing a collection of cards that control the flow of combat. The best part about Commander is the multiplayer nature of it, in my opinion. Being able to play your opponents and not just the cards in their hand is what allows for infinite nuance and replayability. There is also value to be gained by using cards that would never be used inside of a 1v1 environment. Some cards allow you to shape the outcomes of the game through making deals or short alliances to overcome a greater threat. Let's take a card like Skullwinder, for example. At first brush, it looks like a bad Eternal Witness. An opponent could get any card out of their graveyard, but the key aspect to this is timing. What if Eternal Witness said, when this creature enters, return a card from your graveyard to your hand, destroy target creature, and gain 10 life. That sounds like a pretty good Eternal Witness to me. You get to return a card from your hand and discuss with an opponent who already used removal on one threat to reuse that removal on another threat. The 10 life I mentioned is the life that you didn't lose from players attacking you out of fear of losing their best creatures to a Death Touch blocker. Through the power of discussion, you can turn a seemingly underwhelming card into immense value. Kombaj Witches is another card that, when played in a multiplayer context, does much more than what's printed on the card. The witches can deal 1 point of damage to a target of your choice and the target of an opponent's choice. Assuming that there's a common threat at the table, the witches could be used to pick off multiple small creatures or utility creatures of the most threatening player at the table. You choose which opponent chooses the second target. It doesn't have to be the opponent who controls or is the first target. The Hunted cycle plays into this theme of gaining value through cooperation. Hunted Horror is a 2-mana 7/7 that gives an opponent 2 3/3s with protection from the horror. Fighting against them may be an uphill battle, but teaming up with the opponent you gave the 2 3/3s to means that there's 13 power being sent at the biggest threat on the table for merely 2 mana. Another option gaining in popularity is the Sentry Golden Guardian. He is a 4 mana 5/5 with flying, vigilance, and indestructible. When he enters, he has the drawback of giving your opponent a 5/5 black horror villain with flying and indestructible. If we look at this in the same way that we looked at the Hunted cycle, this drawback quickly turns into an upside, with the benefits that you have a 5/5 indestructible attacker and blocker that can negate the damage of the Void in the 1v1. In the event that your opponents aren't in the mood to take deals, we can still give incentives in other ways to control the flow of the game. We can give your opponents benefits for making the choices that they were already going to make anyways. We can put incentives on the table with cards like Nelly Borka, Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor, or even the Monarch mechanic that gives players extra cards when they deal combat damage to our opponents. Curse of Opulence entices our opponents with mana when they attack the enchanted player. Rite of the Raging Storm, Gahiji, and Duelist Heritage help increase your opponent's damage output to the other players at the table. These cards make attacking not only more enticing, but also speeds up the pace of the game, as opponents have reasons to put their creatures into the red zone. Games have to end, and encouraging combat will help board stalls where players don't want to attack to not make enemies at the table. We have the carrot at the end of the stick, but we also need a way to back it up when our opponents choose to come at you. Ghostly Prison and Propaganda force your opponents to pay attacks before sending creatures your way. This could also look like creating an unfavorable board state to attack into, whether with high toughness creatures or creatures with Death Touch. Creatures with specific abilities can also be used as a deterrent in this way. Academy Rector, when dies, you can put an enchantment from your deck onto the battlefield. Or, Vilis, Broker of Blood, lets you draw cards equal to the amount of damage that you've taken. Incentives combined with disincentives create a gameplay flow where players are rewarded for attacking each other but punished for attacking you. Talking is a free action that doesn't require any resources on your end. This can be used to destroy a common threat, protect something on your board, or even goad opponents into attacking one another. Just keep in mind that you are only one of a player in a table of 4, and your opponents know what hinders their deck and what doesn't. Perhaps there's a stacks piece that's affecting your board in a pretty significant way, but if it's not affecting your opponent's board, it might be more advantageous for your opponents to leave it on the field, knowing that it keeps you in check. What you perceive as a total dead end for your game plan, your opponent might see as merely an afterthought on their path to victory. So what do all 3 of these elements have in common? Engines net you card advantage without drawing more cards, activated abilities get you more advantage without recasting things from your hand, and multiplayer politics get you tempo, safety, and damage output for less than the cost and more of the value than you would be spending for this kind of effect in any other format. If there's anything to take away from this, it's to stop measuring your deck's value and efficiency by card draw alone. Take a look at each permanent on the battlefield and ask what it's doing for you, not just on your turn, but also on your opponent's turn. Look at activated abilities and ask what your opponents are not doing because of them. Find the person who's behind and see if there's a deal to be made with them. Sometimes the biggest swing of the game comes from the politics that you were able to make, rather than the cards that you were able to draw. If you got any value out of watching this video, go ahead and give it a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. And while you're down there, go ahead and leave me a comment on some cards that you play that put in more work than they get credit for. My free beginner strength and fat loss guide is also in the first link in the description if you're looking to get started with your fitness journey. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, then YouTube thinks that you'll like this video right here, so go ahead and give it a watch.